Timber Talks is brought to you by Wood Solutions. Stay up to date with the latest in timber, the building material that is strong, safe and sustainable. Here is your host, Adam Jones.
Andrew Waugh is the founding director of War Thistleton Architects, a world-leading architectural practice specialising in CLT. So Andrew Waugh is most known for pioneering with CLT back in 2008 when he built or was the architect for Stadhaus, and more recently Dalston Lane, which was completed in 2017, which is the world's largest CLT project. So in this chat with Andrew, I get to discuss with him the sustainability benefits of CLT, looking at the life cycle of a product from the use phase to the end of life, the inspiration that architects need to change the way or the paradigm they design from when they're looking at CLT buildings, and how the construction industry is ripe for innovation and disruption, and CLT and timber is the one to do it. So I was speaking with Andrew in the midst of the World Conference on Timber Engineering in Seoul, Korea. So he was the keynote here, but when I was speaking to him, it was in the lobby of his hotel, so you can expect a little bit of background noise. Now, I hope you guys enjoy listening to this as much as I did speaking to Andrew Waugh. He's a fascinating person, an incredible architect, and a real leader when it comes to timber design and construction. So without any further ado, here is Andrew Waugh.
So Andrew Waugh from War Thistleton Architects. We are an architects practice based in Shoreditch in East London in the UK. And for the last 15 years, we've been working primarily in timber, in engineered timbers. We built our first cross-laminated timber building in 2003. And we're now up to about, I think, 21 buildings completed in engineered timber. We have about 6 on site at the moment and about another dozen or so in the office.
Fantastic. And I understand sustainability really drives you guys at War Thistleton. And yesterday you commented on sustainability during your talk to everyone. What do you think the implications of sustainability are in the future, and how it will affect how we design and build?
I think that issues around climate change, around the environmental impact of all of our actions, no matter what our field, will become, an incredibly important part of all decision making, whether it's architecture or whatever field you're in. I think the impact of climate change will be something that, we're already beginning to feel it, and how's that going to be in 10 years? So as a practice, we feel that it is, incumbent upon us, that it is an imperative part of what we do is to consider the environmental impact of our actions as architects within the construction of the buildings that we design. So, it's absolutely paramount. But that doesn't mean that it determines the kind of the process or it determines the outcome. It doesn't, and I guess it does determine the process. I mean, it kind of like it does actually underpin what we do. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's part of what we do. So it's not kind of, it's not the single driver of every decision we make. I just think it's very important that it needs to be part of what an architect considers when they're designing a building. And
yesterday you spoke about how developers have changed as well. So when you first got into CLT, you almost had to sell the idea to them, and now it's flipped on its head, and they're actually...
Absolutely. Yeah, so we totally, when we first started working in engineered timber, we totally had to demonstrate that the buildings were viable in terms of cost and program, that they were faster and less expensive than a kind of concrete frame or steel equivalent. But now, you're absolutely right. Certainly that is for commercial developers. So not so much for residential developers, but for commercial developers who, I guess, are selling into a much more competitive market, selling into a much more demanding market than a residential developer, arguably. That the idea that the internal environment of those buildings is an important selling point has led kind of developers within commercial markets to consider the use of timber as an important kind of selling point of their buildings. So that's really exciting for us, because that suddenly means that people are turning around and saying to us, well, we want the building from you because we know that you know how to design timber buildings. So we're like, yeah, that's fantastic.
Absolutely. So we're jumping around a little bit, but I want to touch again on this idea of sustainability. And I saw a YouTube video with yourself and Michael Green in preparing for this podcast, and you were going through the proportion of greenhouse gas emissions that comes from traditional construction materials like concrete and steel. And I was blown away to see that concrete and Portland cement is actually about, I think you said 5 to 8% or in that vicinity anyway. And compare that to, say, airline travel, which is only 2 to 3%. And you mentioned if you build in timber, you can fly where you want. I liked it.
Yeah, that might have just been me riffing off a bit of my... I mean, yeah, well, I probably said that because flying is my weakness. I like to travel. But certainly the impact of cement alone and the production of cement alone is about 3 times that of airline travel. And it's just not something that people engage in. It's not something that's discussed. And it's certainly not something that most architects or developers consider when they're building buildings. So I think that as we move forward with an understanding around climate change and the impact of our actions, then the production of cement, the production of steel, concrete, the way in which we build buildings, even with the kind of the amounts of pollution, noise pollution, air pollution that are involved, I think these will lead us to reconsider the way in which we build buildings currently. I guess that's sort of the timber that we use is all certified. So it's either FSC or PEFC certified. And that means that these are timbers that come from farmed, managed resource. Every tree that is cut down is replanted with 5 more trees. And that there are lots of environmental considerations around the felling of those trees. So it really is kind of like the childhood lessons of photosynthesis come back to us, and we know that as a tree grows, it absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and then releases oxygen. So in a sense becomes the absolute perfect carbon store. So that when you build with a tree, what you're doing is you're actually, you're locking that carbon within the structure of the building itself. So you have a lighter, faster, cleaner method of construction, which in itself is a carbon store. The oxygen in the carbon dioxide is put back into the atmosphere for us all to breathe and enjoy. And so it really is locking down the carbon. And if you consider the production of cement, how cement is made, how concrete is then made with cement, all those processes are actually, they're very energy intensive, but they also emit carbon dioxide as part of the chemical process that forms the cement.
So if we follow the life cycle of a timber panel, now it's at the being built with and it's in the use stage, at the end of life, do you have any strategies or any thoughts on what might be the best way of using timber at the very end?
Sure. I mean, the best thing that you can do is to reuse, and to recycle. So we're already seeing the recycling and the reusing of cross-laminated timber panels within the industry. That's which is already exciting. So you have a material, unlike concrete and steel, which because it's light, because it's easy to work with, you can cut that material down and reuse it. The other thing as well is that ultimately, because the adhesive content in engineered timber is so low, that you can pulp this material for paper, you can chip it for fuel ultimately. So this is an incredibly reusable, recyclable material, which is exciting as well.
Another interesting thing that I saw from your keynote yesterday was you had a graph that looked at the productivity of a whole bunch of different industries over the last, since 1990 or something. You obviously know the slide a bit better than me. But we had construction kind of stagnating almost, whereas the other industries, as you'd expect, almost had an exponential kind of function.
I mean, the productivity in construction has been stagnant for about 120 years. I mean, it's kind of incredible. When you compare it to car manufacturing or to the manufacturing of most goods, or to agriculture or to medicine, the kind of advances that have been made in other fields, and then you go to a typical construction site, and really that would be completely recognizable to somebody from 100 years ago. It's kind of insane that we are still building in this very kind of inaccurate, messy, dirty method of construction. I mean, it's just, if somebody arrived on your driveway with your car in pieces and said that they were just going to assemble the car in front of you on the driveway, you'd be like, what on earth are you doing? And yeah, that's how we build our houses, and they're kind of, and as I was saying yesterday, it doesn't matter whether you're doing your bathroom or you're building 1,000 homes. Everybody seems to hate the process of building. Everybody hates the process of construction. It feels like it's kind of going to be a, sort of dishonest, opaque, kind of fraught with risk. Everybody's kind of like filled with kind of like trepidation as soon as they embark on any kind of construction project.
Yeah.
And yet this should be something which we're all sort of excited about, overjoyed about, really enjoy the process of, and yet it's not. And I think that we really need to totally re-examine the way in which we build things. The whole approach to this industry is wrong. I mean, for one thing, the lack of diversity, gender diversity specifically in the construction industry is appalling. We don't allow for that in any other industry. And so, yeah, lots of things to change. I mean, I think there is a sort of a stigma attached to factory-produced housing specifically, in that it's going to be, low-quality housing, that it's going to be restrictive by the fact that it's made in a factory. And I think we need to get away from that notion. We need to see that actually factory-made housing is an opportunity for better quality housing. I mean, you go again back to my rather kind of poor analogy of building a car on a driveway, that actually one would be nervous about that because one would feel that the quality of that car would not be very high. And yet, when it comes to construction, the idea that you would build it, in front of you would mean that it would be a high quality if it was made in a factory. And that actually is quite clearly not the case. So I think that factory-made housing can produce higher quality housing. It can also, as I was saying before, reduce the dust, the noise, the transportation levels in our cities. And I think that's an incredibly important part of it as well.
So you've obviously had your timber journey, I think, started the Stadhaus in 2008, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. That was a huge leap in terms of innovation from what was previously going on. Do you think we can expect any more kind of leaps in innovation?
Absolutely. And we're seeing them all from me. I hope so. Yeah. No, that was my candle in the wind. That was my... No, I think that... I think we will see great innovation in timber construction. I think that one of the things that we're seeing at the moment are a lot of concrete buildings made of timber. And I think that what we will see in the next generation, the next decades, are actually a transformation of not only the construction process, but also the kinds of buildings that we're building with a new material. And that's we haven't really begun to touch on that yet, and I wish I had the kind of, the talent or the ability to actually really understand where that was going to take us. But I think that we're building now, we're building concrete buildings out of timber, and I think that that's what's got to change. So I think there'll be changes and advances in timber technology, but I also think the typology of the architecture that we produce from a new material will change, will develop into a new and more exciting architecture than the one that we've been stuck in for the last 100 years or so. Yeah. So you kind of like, I think the thing is that when you're an architect, you really are designing with a kind of, a collage of buildings that you've seen before, of a collage of images that you understand, an architecture that's part of your vocabulary. And our vocabulary is a concrete one. And so to design out of that is, that's the challenge. And I think for me, it's made me respect, the architects of the 1920s and 1930s to an even greater degree. I mean, these were people, like Corbusier and Bauhaus, etc. But these were people who grew up in small masonry timber frame houses and had the vision to think about, a modernism of reinforced concrete to completely change their notion of what a building would look like. And I think that we need to emulate that level of ambition, that level of insightfulness, of imagination, of thoughtfulness into a new timber architecture. And that's the challenge.
So it sounds like we need to enter a new paradigm of design. So
Absolutely.
Do you have, what advice would you give for architects who are just really starting out on this journey. They've heard about timber and they're really interested in moving in this direction like yourself has?
What advice? Jeez. Be ready to be poor for ages. I think, I mean, I guess the advice that you give any architect is, travel, see lots of different things, make sure that you're kind of like, that your visual kind of lexicon of buildings is massive, and engage in other cultures of architecture, or the architecture of other cultures rather. And I think that read, study, look at what you can, keep drawing.
Amazing. All right, so you've
make friends with engineers.
Yeah.
that's a good one.
Well, that's a good point. More of a collaborative approach.
I think so. Yeah, I think yeah, absolutely right, Adam. And I think that we in architecture specifically, in architectural education in the UK at the moment, the idea is that actually engineers become problem solvers. So the architect comes up with something, fairly whimsical, and then hands the sketch over to the engineer, and and says, "Make it so, Mr. Engineer," and off you go. And I think that the nature of that relationship is really, it's really unhealthy, really broken. And what we need to do is to reinvestigate the way that we think about the collaboration between architect and engineer.
Great. So what's coming up for War Thistleton? What projects are on the horizon? Is there anything we can share with the listeners?
Wow. We continue to research. We continue to design and to build. We're looking at different types of engineered timber now. So we're working in hardwoods, different combinations of softwoods, looking at carbon fiber jointing. There's so much interesting stuff going on. We have a dozen or so projects in the pipeline, and those projects are getting bigger and taller and more exciting. So yeah, just watch this space. We're on it at the moment. It's so exciting.
Fantastic. And if people want to find out more about yourself and Waugh Thistleton, where can they go?
East London.
Yeah.
Come and see us. Come and drop by.
So all Aussies just get on the plane and
get on a plane and come see us, or or go on the internet.
Yeah, it's probably
just keep an eye out. And architecture students, engineering students, always welcome in the office to come and drop by, see what we're doing. So, absolutely
fantastic. Thanks for coming on the show, Andrew.
Pleasure.
If you want to use timber on your next project, the latest Wood Solutions Design Guide, number 46, Wood Construction Systems, can help. It has been developed to assist building professionals to confidently explore conceptual structural designs for timber-rich buildings and structures. The link to this guide, along with the other 45 guides, can be found in the show notes.